Scott Simpson.
Mr Speaker, it's always a pleasure to follow the reasonably unordinary, reasonable Andrew Little. And it will be good to have him back on the Justice and Electoral Select Committee to consider this very useful and good piece of legislation that's been introduced into the House. Oh, I think the Honourable Marion Street needs to be there as well. But what I'm suggesting to the member is that we're missing him from the committee, and it's often appropriate, I think, usually, that the Justice spokesperson for a serious party should sit on the Justice Committee. But however, in this case, usually we don't see too much of him, but we'll be welcome back for this piece of legislation. Sir, bullying, sadly, has been around since time immemorial, really. The difficulty with bullying in the past has been how to track it down, how to stop it and how to control it. But one of the challenges that those of us who were not born digital natives have is that we were raised through our adolescent and teenage years in an environment where we weren't subjected to digital harassment by harassment by digital technology. And some of my colleagues are, of course, younger. But today we find that for most people under the age of, I guess, about 30, they are what we now know as digital natives. And they have grown up in an environment where, sadly, it has been a lot easier to partake of bullying and abuse and far worse by the use of cyberspace and Facebook and internet and text and all those modern communications. So the purpose of this bill, Mr Speaker, is of course to mitigate the harm caused to people by digital communications and to provide the victims of that harm with a quick and efficient means of redress. And the trick, I guess, for this piece of legislation is how do we manage that in an environment that is, in many respects, a little bit like the Wild West of technology. And it's a challenging conundrum for legislators, I suspect, all over the world. And I'm looking forward to, in the committee stages, to seeing what steps are being taken in other jurisdictions, because I suspect that this piece of legislation has the potential to be quite world-leading, and I suspect that there will be others who will be watching closely what we do. The Law Commission has found that it could be as many as 1 in 10 New Zealanders that have already experienced harmful communications on the internet, and that for those aged between 19 and 29, the number could well be double that. So there is obviously a serious issue here. The Law Commission was doing work already on the harmful communications as part of its report on new media. The report was entitled "The News Media Meets New Media: Rights, Responsibilities and Regulation in the Digital Age." And it was last year that Justice Minister Collins asked the Commission to actually speed their work up and to fast-track the work. And in August of last year, she received the Law Commission's recommendations, harmful digital communications, in the form of a briefing paper. And then it was this April that she announced a suite of proposals to tackle cyberbullying, which will be implemented through this bill. So the main provisions of the bill are to create a set of 10 communication principles to guide the approved agency that will be created under the bill, and that, I think, will be something that we'll want to look at closely in Select Committee. But the bill will create essentially a new civil enforcement regime that includes the setting up of this new agency as a first port of call for complaints. And the agency, Mr Speaker, will be able to investigate and resolve complaints directly and very quickly, with the most serious complaints being referred to the District Court, which can then issue what is known as a takedown order, and of course they will also be able to put in place cease and desist notices. So this legislation provides a mechanism for people to quickly and easily request the removal of harmful digital content from websites and blogs if necessary, and it also creates this safe harbour provision. Mr Speaker, I'm very much looking forward to the Select Committee process. I'm pleased that the Labor Party is supporting this through to Select Committee, and I hope that other parties across the House will do likewise. I commend it to the House.
Honourable Marianne Street.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It gives me some pleasure to rise to speak to this harmful digital communications bill. While it may have been a long time coming, it doesn't alter the fact that it is here now, and I welcome that. We are supporting it on this side of the House, Mr Speaker, with some reservations, and they're only reservations that anybody would have around this kind of issue, I think. And I want to outline three areas in particular that will need careful scrutiny on the part of the Select Committee, which the previous Speaker chairs so adeptly. Mr Speaker, it's true, as Scott Simpson said, that there was a Law Commission issues paper that came out in 2011, but also last year the Law Commission's ministerial briefing called Harmful Digital Communications, the Adequacy of the Current Sanctions and Remedies came out. And I think that that is a significant contribution to how we might get legislation to deal with issues that people had not envisaged arising a decade ago. Because of new technologies, it's incumbent on this House to make sure that we keep our laws up to date. And I think my colleague Andrew Little put it well when he referred to the law chasing or having to keep up with some pace with some technological developments. It puts me in mind, Mr Speaker, of the time when I was serving on the Commerce Committee and we dealt with copyright legislation. And it was very difficult to get copyright legislation that didn't put people out of business and yet protected the rights of artists and creative people in particular to their work. And with every exposure through digital media, the copyright problem became more pronounced. Didn't matter whether it was music or writing, it became more and more difficult to get the law to fit. This is not dissimilar, and there is a sense of the horse having bolted already, but it's appropriate that this House turn its mind to this. We are all acutely sensitised to this issue because of recent revelations about Facebook behaviour that has been nothing short of despicable. Whether or not crimes end up proven to have been committed, the behaviour is despicable. And I think some young people will find their reputations and their career prospects destroyed because of what they themselves have indulged in by way of Facebook revelations. And that is a lesson to all young people, or will be in time, I think. However, there are three things I want to cover. First of all, I'm particularly interested in Part 2 of the bill, Mr Speaker, which refers to the number of acts that need to be amended by the passage of this legislation. First of all, there's the Crimes Act, and that's almost self-explanatory. But there are three other pieces of legislation that will be amended simply by the insertion of words that are to do with electronic communication or electronic media, or words like participation in fora for the exchange of ideas and information. These pieces of legislation are the Harassment Act of 1997, the Human Rights Act of 1993, and the Privacy Act of 1993. Now, each of these presents the Select Committee with a different nuance, a different layer of application of this bill. Because the Harassment Act, fine, we're bringing that up to date by putting electronic media and electronic communication into the meaning of harassment as it is expressed in that Act. And that is a good thing, because we are aware and, as I say, acutely sensitised at the moment to harassment, to bullying, to exposure of people in a way that is despicable, as I've said. And so that Harassment Act is going to be an important part of the consideration. A second important one, in my mind, Mr. Speaker, is the amendments to the Human Rights Act, because this will, this subpart 3 in part 2 of the bill will amend the Human Rights Act. It'll amend section 61, which addresses racial disharmony. It will amend section 62, which refers to sexual harassment, and it will amend section 63 that refers to racial harassment. Mr. Speaker, this is critically important because next comes the amendments to the Privacy Act. There are provisions in the Human Rights Act that, with the addition of this bill and the amendment by this bill, that will really go to the heart of freedom of speech and the inability of people to compromise other people's rights to exist peacefully. That is covered in the Human Rights Act through a range of provisions, and making the electronic media or electronic communications susceptible to those acts is a good thing. We do not need neo-Nazi fascist websites to proliferate in this country, and I am pleased if by this means there will be some address of that, which certainly in other countries around the world we have seen such proliferation, and that is undesirable. But the third point, Mr. Speaker, is around privacy. This will amend the Privacy Act, but it is going to be an area that requires considerable submission from interested parties and real consideration of those submissions on the part of the Select Committee. Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, we need to be careful around ISP providers, and we need to be mindful of impacts on their services and their ability to function as businesses with notice and takedown measures. So that's another area, and that business consideration I hope will be represented by a submission from Internet New Zealand, because it does impact on them. Mr. Speaker, I think this is a worthwhile measure. It's got some fishhooks in it. It's got very sensitive and far-reaching implications across other parts of our legislation, and I commend it to the House, Mr. Speaker.
Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr. Speaker. Ngā mihi nui.